Welcome back to Worldview. Now, Dr. Rebecca Johnson is director of the Acronym Institute for Disarmament Diplomacy, and you can find that at www.acronym.org.uk. And she's also co-chair of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. Her main areas of expertise are international security, peace and disarmament, and nuclear safety. Dr. Johnson's a current member of the International Panel on Fissile Materials, the IPFM, and she's a former senior advisor to the International WMD, Weapons of Mass Destruction Commission, and former vice chair of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. And she's advised on energy and weapons, Scotland's nuclear bases, NATO, non-proliferation, weapons of mass destruction, all around the globe. Now, we wanted to have her on to discuss the humanitarian consequences of war, conflict, and the various types of weapons we're seeing, including nuclear, and what's happening right now in North Korea. She's author of the book Unfinished Business, about civil society and government strategies to achieve the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, or CTBT. Dr. Johnson, welcome to Worldview.
Thank you very much.
Now, we've spent the last week watching North Korea basically wind up the rest of the world, and we're somewhat used to that, but what we're not used to is they're threatening a nuclear attack. You tell me, where is North Korea today in terms of its ability to act on the threats that we're hearing?
Well, it's not very clear, and the first point that we need to make is that nuclear weapons have been given a particular kind of role, strategic value by the rest of the world. There are actually 9 countries. North Korea is the 9th country to declare that it has a nuclear weapon capability. And this nuclear weapon capability has actually been used to hold the world hostage for far too long. Now, North Korea learned from that at the time that it was put on George Bush's axis of evil together with Iraq and Iran, and then the Bush administration invaded Iraq. So North Korea at about that time withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, under which it had promised not to get nuclear weapons, and began to weaponize. Now, a lot of it has been their attempt to convince the rest of the world that they have the weapons. Unlike some other countries that sort of develop clandestinely, North Korea is playing the nuclear card. So we have to understand the context. This has 2 audiences, really. It has an American political audience, and alongside that, the South Korean, the other half of the Korean peninsula, which is a close ally of the United States. But I would say that Kim Jong-un's primary audience for this ratcheting up of the nuclear threat that has been going on in the last few days, and actually I should say months, is the domestic audience in North Korea. And it's because nuclear weapons are given a particular kind of value that he is playing that card to try to unite people who should, in fact, be rebelling against him.
Well, this is something that's been very strange to watch from pretty much any side. And I have to ask the question, is there any sign of adult supervision there in Pyongyang? And by that, I mean, who's in control? Does Kim Jong-un have the respect of the military leadership there, or is he acting on his own to try and get that respect?
We don't really know, but what I think is happening is that he is trying to prove to them that he can be a very strong leader. Actually, it seems that he's trying to prove to them that he can be like his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, who was seen to be the great liberator, the dear leader, all of these sorts of things. And precisely because he has no background, precisely because of his youth, he may have a great deal to prove domestically. Certainly he's perceived as a weak leader. And this is something else to understand about the role that nuclear weapons plays nowadays. This is not a weapon that is of much use to strong leaders, leaders that are democratic, that have the confidence and the support of their own people. Nuclear weapons are actually about shoring up weak leaders. We see that even here in the UK with the Trident debate. It's all about political posturing. It's not about what we need for security. We don't need nuclear weapons for any kind of security, frankly, and neither does North Korea. It is about posturing, about attaching a kind of macho prestige to a particular weapon of mass destruction. The only weapon of mass destruction that hasn't yet been globally banned is nuclear weapons, and that's why it's being used to play this kind of a role.
We're talking about North Korea with Dr. Rebecca Johnson on Worldview with Denis Campbell. Dr. Johnson, now I read somewhere, I believe it was in one of the IAEA reports, that they're estimated to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 warheads, but they have no long-range delivery missiles, and indeed if they tried to put one on top of one of their long-range missiles, it would just simply crack apart just like most everything else does. So the question then becomes, what harm can they do, not only intercontinental-wise, but what harm can they do in the region if they did have that capability?
Well, what we mean by capability is that assessments have been made about how much plutonium, which is the fissile material that is the core of the nuclear weapons. You can either use plutonium or highly enriched uranium. And as far as we know, North Korea has developed or reprocessed, separated enough plutonium for somewhere between about 8 and 12 nuclear weapons. Now, we don't know if they've weaponized that. They've had 3 nuclear tests. The first 2 were pretty well regarded as being fizzles, as being failures. The third one that they had just in February of this year may have been more serious in terms of the capability that it could deliver. Now, they also do have a missile program. They've been trying to pretend that they've been putting up satellites into space. The technology for putting satellites in space is the technology for a long-range missile. But their tests on that keep failing. The biggest, again, I have to emphasize, I think we need to separate out what is the actual military threat and capability and what is being posturized, if you like, what is being claimed.
Please do. This is what our audience would love to know as well.
Yeah, because clearly Kim Jong-un wants South Korea, Japan, and the United States and the rest of the world to believe that they could deliver nuclear weapons, because that's part of the political game around so-called nuclear deterrence that they have learned would keep the United States away and that they can see as potentially working for them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they can. Certainly, I think when you hear David Cameron, for example, suggesting that North Korea could deliver a nuclear weapon to Europe or to Britain, this is complete nonsense and highly irresponsible talk. I don't think at the moment that North Korea has a nuclear warhead with a missile that could be delivered beyond, basically, I don't think they could even deliver to Japan, which is the nearest of the neighbors that they might be wanting to threaten. What is more worrying is that they could have a fairly crude device that could cause a Hiroshima-type nuclear explosion that could be delivered by airplane, by ship into a harbor, could be delivered by some means onto a South Korean target. And because South Korea is a very populous country, obviously, a democratic country, certainly within reason, and is also an important ally for the United States, just threatening that they could have that capability, I think, is what Kim Jong-un hopes to turn into some kind of leverage or some kind of advantage. Now, the important thing for the rest of the world is to keep our heads and to keep cool. On the one hand about this, I think these kind of exercises of the United States sort of flying its spy planes over the military, every time South Korea and the United States have a military exercise, North Korea, Pyongyang, gets very nervous, and they tend to do something that is a lot of saber rattling at about that time.
Well, and we had, what was it, just a year or so ago, the ship sinking, and at the same time that these exercises were going on. I mean, and if you think about they seem to have somehow rattled a little bit Beijing, and just looking at the map, Beijing and Pyongyang are almost on the same parallel. So when you start talking about nuclear weapons and weaponization, then even a small weapon going off even in South Korea, you're talking about fallout that could drift anywhere along the Chinese peninsula. That would, you're talking, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, even Guam, that could be affected. Even Hong Kong is not outside of the after what we've seen with the Fukushima disaster. So, what sorts of impacts are we talking about, and how can they be avoided?
Yeah, any use, any detonation of a nuclear weapon would have catastrophic humanitarian consequences. I think we have to be very clear about that. That it would kill. Again, it depends on the size and so on, but you have effects like blast and heat that would kill thousands in a city at the center. You have flash that would blind and burn. Then you have the radiation effect that would take longer, but be just as devastating over the mid to long term, and would also contaminate agriculture. But on top of that, the cities are much, much larger nowadays than they were in 1945 when Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed. Now, around 200,000 people were killed by just those two very relatively small bombs by today's standards. Within 5 years, another 200,000 to 300,000, so more than twice that number, died within the next 5 years of the injuries. They were seen to be survivors initially, but they died within 5 years. This is another of the effects of nuclear weapons. And then there's a longer term effect. If several nuclear weapons are used on cities of today's kinds of sizes with the sort of concrete and bricks that you have, you would get pulverized dust being lofted into the atmosphere where it would circulate. Now that has just been recently studied by scientists looking at a relatively small number of nuclear weapons, and they've called this effect nuclear winter, from a so-called limited nuclear war. Now, many of us remember in the 1980s talk of a nuclear winter if the Soviet Union and the US unleashed their nuclear arsenals.
Right.
What the scientists now, people like Professor Alan Robock from Rutgers University, Dr. Ira Helfand, who's a physician from Boston, what these scientists have looked at is not massive releases, but less than 100 nuclear weapons, the explosive power of half of the weapons carried by the one UK Trident submarine that used on cities. That would be enough to cause this radioactive dust cloud to circulate around the world for around about 10 years. This would cause catastrophic global cooling, very abrupt. Within a few days, you get a cooling effect that would last for 10 days. So you'd not just have radioactive contamination of agriculture nearby where the weapons were used, you'd have global starvation due to agriculture failing around the world because of the very abrupt cooling. Now, this is what we're talking about. Now, anyone has to know that, and I think the leadership of North Korea are aware that for them to use one of their nuclear weapons, even on the near neighbor Seoul, would be tantamount to suicide. The world, the United States in particular, nobody would be able to allow that to happen.
No, and it's just, it's just astonishing when you start to look at some of these after effects. I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Worldview.
I'll just say a couple more words, because we really need to understand that the reason why North Korea thinks the nuclear card is something that they can hold the United States at bay. This is a political thing because of the value that we, the world, give to this weapon of mass destruction. And the only way we can take that value away again and prevent proliferation and actually save our own humanitarian security and safety is actually to join together and ban nuclear weapons globally. That has to be the answer to prevent this kind of nuclear blackmail and saber rattling.
Very sobering indeed. We've been talking with Dr. Rebecca Johnson. She's the author of the book Unfinished Business about civil society and government strategies to achieve the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. And she's also, excuse me, in charge of the Acronym Institute for Disarmament Diplomacy, which you can find at www.acronym.org.uk. Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much for having me.
And when we return, we'll be talking with Rick Spizak, who is the head of the Progressive News Network, about some of the political implications of what we've just heard from Dr. Johnson. You're watching Worldview with Denis Campbell. Keep it right here.